You are either already aware or soon will be aware that you are going to do a project called the River Project, and it's going to use a spreadsheet to work with a calculus problem. So here are 3 items that you probably need to put into your brain about spreadsheets to help you with that project, and then a subtle reminder that this 4th item you already know, if-then statements, but you may need to use it in a clever way on this project. So let's take a look. The very first item is find a max or a min from a list or a blob of numbers. So over here on the left in column B is a list of points off on a recent calculus test curve. If I wanted to find the person or the score that is the minimum in that entire list, I would go to a new cell, start with an equal sign. You should be looking at the formula bar up here or over here. And then I type min, which represents minimum, and I open a parentheses and I shade over or swipe over that entire list. And now I hit equals and it told me the minimum amount was 3. By the way, if I would want to find the maximum, I would say equals max. And this time I'm going to shade over just a different part, just maybe in that section. What's the maximum in that section? Equals max, swipe over what I care about, boom, I got 25. And by the way, if I wanted to find the minimum score in a blob, it doesn't have to be arranged in a list, a nice orderly list, but here's a blob. So I did an equals minimum, open a parentheses, swipe over that, and I close the parentheses, and in that blob of numbers, the minimum value is a 2. Keep in mind I'm using MIN or MAX. If I type out minimum or maximum, it's not going to work. All right, so now you know an easy way to find a min or a max from a blob of numbers. Now let's say, hey, how can I put a formula inside a text, a written sentence? So here it says, if calories didn't exist, I would probably eat 16 donuts. Well, in this blob of values, I'm just going to change that 16 into a 45. Boom. And you see in this line of text, the 16 turned into a 45. Now I'm going to turn it back to a 31 because 45 would be ridiculous. I would eat 31 donuts. So how is this happening? I click on this cell. That's where I wrote that sentence. And the first thing to notice is I started with an equal sign up there. And the equal sign is going to tell the spreadsheet that we're going to be doing some calculations. Then I start with quotes and I start to type out what I want to type out. However, when I want to input a reference to a cell, and in this case it's cell J5, right here, this 31 is J5, I end the part of the sentence before the value with a quotation marks. Then I do that fancy and sign. I click on the cell. Then I do another fancy and sign. That's telling the text sentence to refer to the value within that cell. And then after that, I go back to the quotations and finish my sentence. And I might need to play around with leaving spaces in and out of those quotations. Experiment with that a couple times and you'll get that down. That's how you can put a value within a text, which is kind of nice. So now you can have a written paragraph that updates as your data updates. And finally, rounding. There might be a misconception about rounding in a spreadsheet. So for example, I have this cell right here, the 12.333, computing the average of this blob of numbers. So to show that, I'll turn this 31 into a 16. And now the average of that blob of numbers is 11.619, blah, blah, blah. Well, when you have that blob of numbers, you can go up to the icon up here and decrease the decimal places. Ignore the one underneath that for right now, or increase the decimal places. That's just showing you what is going to be displayed on your spreadsheet, but the spreadsheet is remembering all the values that are not displayed. So for example, that looks like 11.6, but if in the cell right next to it I said equals that times 2, you would think it's going to say 23.2, but it doesn't. It says 23.23809,524 because the spreadsheet knows that even though that says 11.6, it really has a whole bunch more decimals underneath it. All right, but if I wanted to round and just disregard any other decimals, here's what I do. In the cell below it, but it doesn't have to be below it, I wrote equals and then round, round, and then parentheses. The first thing I entered into the parentheses was a reference to cell E9. That's the cell I want to round. Then comma 1, because I wanted to round it to the first decimal. So now you see it rounded to the first decimal, 11.6. And by the way, if you didn't like all those extra decimals hanging around, zeros, just go with that. Now equals this times 2, it gives me the 23.2. So you must really keep in mind that when you're messing around with the decimal equivalents that are shown, that's different than actually rounding to a value. And by the way, if I wanted to round this to 3 decimals, I'm going to go back into the formula where I was rounding, and I'm going to change the 1 to a 3. Now it doesn't look like it's displaying 3 decimals, but it really is. And you'll notice that when this is rounded to 3 decimals, the updated multiplication statement is also rounded. Just realize there's a difference between showing what's displayed and what's actually rounded. So those are the 3 new concepts that you might need, probably will need, for the River Project spreadsheet. And remember that the if-then idea can be cleverly used on that spreadsheet.